It was one of those days when the house felt too empty, the kind of quiet that made you restless. Jenny, my wife, was away for the weekend with her friends, and the house seemed larger and more desolate than ever. Usually, I'd appreciate a little peace, but this time, the silence was unsettling. There was something simmering in the back of my mind that I couldn't shake. Lately, my thoughts had been wandering somewhere they shouldn't. More specifically, they'd been drifting towards Sarah, Jenny's mom. I couldn't help it. I knew it was wrong, but there was something about Sarah that had been gnawing at me for a while now. She was beautiful, that much was obvious. Everyone could see that. Her long blonde hair always seemed to fall perfectly, and those striking green eyes of hers had a way of piercing right through you. But it wasn't just her appearance that captivated me. It was the way she carried herself, confident, elegant, the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. I had known Sarah for years, but recently something had shifted between us. It wasn't anything overt, but there were moments, brief instances during family gatherings or dinners, where our eyes would meet and the air between us would thicken. It wasn't something either of us acknowledged, but it was there, lingering. Every time I saw her, I couldn't help but feel drawn to her, like there was some magnetic force pulling me in her direction. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself. But as time went on, I found myself thinking about her more and more. The way she laughed at my jokes, the way her hand would brush my arm during casual conversations. Every interaction seemed to carry a weight that hadn't been there before. And the worst part? I couldn't stop thinking about it. That Saturday afternoon, the silence in my house became unbearable. I had spent the morning trying to distract myself, scrolling through my phone, flipping through TV channels, but nothing worked. My thoughts kept circling back to her. I knew I had to do something, anything, to clear my mind. And before I even realized what I was doing, I was grabbing my car keys and heading out the door. The drive over to Sarah's house was a blur. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say when I got there. My excuse was thin at best. I'd tell her I was just checking in, making sure she was doing okay with her husband out of town. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the real reason. I needed to see her. I needed to feel that pull between us again, to see if it was all in my head or if it was something real. When I pulled into her driveway, my heart was already racing. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. This was crazy. What the hell was I even doing? But the thought of turning back felt impossible. I got out of the car, my feet carrying me toward the front door like I was on autopilot. The door was unlocked, as it usually was when she was expecting someone. I stepped inside, glancing around the familiar living room, but there was no sign of her. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but then I heard it, the faint sound of water running upstairs. My pulse quickened. She was in the bath. I should have left right then. I should have turned around and walked back out the door, but instead, I found myself walking toward the staircase, the sound of the running water guiding me like a beacon. My chest tightened with each step I took, my mind racing. What was I doing here? What did I think was going to happen? Before I knew it, I was standing at the top of the stairs just outside the bathroom door. The scent of lavender bath salts hung in the air, thick and intoxicating. My heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it through the door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, but instead of turning around and leaving like I knew I should, I knocked softly on the door. Sarah? My voice came out quieter than I intended, shaky and uncertain. There was a pause, long enough for me to consider turning around, but then her voice, calm and almost inviting, floated through the door. Yes? I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I just wanted to check on you. Are you okay in there? There was another pause, longer this time, and I could hear the faint sound of water shifting in the tub. I imagined her sitting there, surprised to hear my voice on the other side of the door. I waited, my heart in my throat, until finally she answered. Yes, I'm fine. Just taking a bath, she said, her tone casual, though there was an undercurrent of something else, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I should have left it at that, told her I was just checking in and excused myself. But instead, the words slipped out before I could stop them. Do you mind if I come in for a minute? My heart pounded as the silence stretched between us. I half expected her to tell me no, that it was inappropriate or weird. But then, to my shock, she responded, "Come in." That was all it took. The moment she said those words, I felt a rush of adrenaline, like I had just crossed an invisible line and there was no going back. I pushed the door open slowly, my breath catching in my throat as I stepped inside. The bathroom was filled with steam, the air thick with the scent of lavender. Sarah was reclining in the bathtub, her head resting against the edge, her blonde hair damp and clinging to her skin. The soft light from the single overhead bulb cast a warm glow over her, making her skin look even more radiant. I stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. But when her eyes met mine, a small, knowing smile played on her lips. It was like she had been expecting me. "Just checking on me, huh?" she teased, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable edge of amusement. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, just making sure you didn't need anything." She chuckled lightly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm fine, Mike, but you can stay if you want." Her voice was calm, but there was something in the way she said it, something that made my pulse race even faster. I should have walked out. I should have thanked her, made up some excuse, and left. But the way she was looking at me, the way the air between us felt heavy with tension. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor, my mind racing with thoughts I shouldn't be having. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice coming out lower than I intended. She nodded, her gaze never leaving mine. "Yeah, I think I could use some company." That was it. That one sentence, said so casually, was the green light I didn't even know I was waiting for. My mind screamed at me to stop, to get out of there, but my body had other plans. Without thinking, I took a step closer to the tub, my eyes locked on hers. The water rippled softly as she shifted, and I noticed the way her body moved under the bubbles. My heart was racing now, my palms sweaty as I stood beside the tub, unsure of what to do next. But Sarah didn't seem the least bit nervous. She looked calm, collected, like she had been waiting for this moment. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The words left my mouth before I could even process them, but I didn't regret it. Sarah raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across her face. "If you think you can handle it." That was all the encouragement I needed. Without saying another word, I pulled off my shirt, tossing it to the floor. I could feel her eyes on me, watching as I undressed, and it only fueled the fire building inside of me. My hands were trembling slightly as I unbuttoned my jeans, slipping out of them and stepping closer to the tub. Her gaze was intense, her eyes dark and filled with something I couldn't quite place, something dangerous and exciting. I slid into the water beside her, the heat of the bath wrapping around me like a cocoon. The space was tight, forcing us to sit close, our legs brushing under the water. The sensation of her skin against mine sent a shockwave through me, and I had to stop myself from shuddering. For a few moments, we just sat there, neither of us saying anything. The tension was thick, palpable, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Every breath I took felt heavy, like the air in the room was too thick to breathe. But I didn't want to break the silence. The anticipation was too strong, the electricity between us almost crackling. "So, what's the real reason you're here?" she asked after a few minutes, her voice soft but full of meaning. Her leg brushed against mine again, intentionally this time, and the contact sent a jolt of heat through me. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I could lie, say it was just to check on her, but we both knew that wasn't the truth. We both knew why I was really here. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," I admitted, my voice low and raw. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and real. Her eyes softened, and she leaned in just a little closer, her hand grazing my arm under the water. "I've been thinking about you too," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. That was it. That was all it took to break the last thread of self-control I had been clinging to. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my lips finding hers in a soft, tentative kiss. It was brief, a mere brush of our mouths, but the effect was instant. Heat surged through my body, and I could feel my pulse racing in my ears. I pulled back, my heart pounding as I searched her face for any sign of hesitation. But there was none. Her eyes were dark, her breathing shallow, and there was no mistaking the desire written all over her face. She didn't wait for me to make the next move. Her hand reached up, sliding around the back of my neck, pulling me back to her. Our lips met again, but this time there was nothing tentative about it. The kiss deepened, became urgent, hungry, as months of tension and unspoken words finally boiled over. Her body pressed against mine, her fingers tangling in my hair as the water splashed up around us. The heat of her skin, the feel of her lips moving against mine, it was all consuming. I couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything but her. I pulled her closer, my hand slipping under the water to rest on her waist, and I could feel the way her body responded to my touch. She let out a soft, breathless moan against my lips, and it only made me want her more. We broke apart just long enough to catch our breath, both of us panting, the air between us heavy with desire. "This is wrong," she whispered, her forehead resting against mine, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I don't care." She let out a shaky breath, her hand still resting on the back of my neck. "Neither do I." Once the words were out, there was no stopping us. Every thought, every ounce of reason that told us we should stop, was drowned out by the heat of the moment. Sarah leaned back against the edge of the tub, pulling me closer until I was hovering above her, the water splashing softly as we moved. Her eyes were locked on mine, filled with the same desperate need I was feeling. I kissed her again, this time slower, savoring the way her lips felt against mine. The room seemed to spin around us, and it was like we were the only two people in the world. My hands roamed over her body under the water, finding the soft curves of her waist, her hips, feeling the way her skin heated under my touch. Each movement, each small gasp from her, only made the tension between us grow stronger. Her hands moved down my back, pulling me closer, and I could feel the urgency in her touch. There was no hesitation anymore. We had crossed the line, and neither of us was going to stop. My fingers brushed against her thigh, and I felt her shudder at the contact, her breath catching in her throat. It was impossible to deny the chemistry between us, the way our bodies responded to each other. Every touch felt electric, like I was on fire. Her lips left mine, trailing down my neck, and I felt a groan escape my throat as her mouth moved lower. My mind was a blur, lost in the sensation of her touch. I never thought I'd be here, doing this, with her. And yet, it felt like everything had led to this moment, this secret connection we had been building for so long. As we lost ourselves in each other, the outside world faded away. It didn't matter that this was wrong, that we were breaking every rule. All that mattered was the way she made me feel, the intensity, the desire, the way every inch of my body was tuned to hers. I didn't care about the consequences, didn't care about the fallout. In that moment, all I cared about was her. For what felt like hours, we stayed tangled together, our bodies moving in perfect sync. It was like we couldn't get enough of each other, like every touch only fueled the fire between us. The heat of the water, the soft sounds of our breaths mingling in the steamy air, it all created a world that was just ours, just for us. Eventually, we found ourselves lying in the tub, our bodies entwined, both of us breathless. The water had long since cooled, but neither of us wanted to move. I stared up at the ceiling, my heart still pounding as I tried to process what had just happened. This changes everything," she whispered after a long silence, her voice barely audible over the sound of water dripping from the faucet. I nodded, still unable to fully wrap my mind around it. "Yeah, it does." She shifted beside me, her head resting on my chest as her fingers traced lazy patterns on my skin. "What do we do now?" I sighed, closing my eyes as I tried to think. What did we do now? How could we possibly go back to the way things were? There was no undoing what had just happened, no pretending it didn't change everything. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice heavy with the weight of it all. "But we'll figure it out." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers stilling on my chest. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I opened my eyes and looked down at her. Her expression was vulnerable, her normally confident demeanor stripped away, and it made my heart ache. I reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair away from her face. No, I said firmly. I don't regret it. Her eyes softened, and she let out a small breath of relief. Me neither. We stayed like that for a while longer, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The reality of what we'd done was starting to sink in, and I knew things would never be the same between us. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty about it. Not yet. Not when I still felt the warmth of her body pressed against mine, the taste of her lips still lingering on my skin. Eventually, we climbed out of the tub, drying off in silence. The weight of what we had done was hanging in the air between us, unspoken but undeniable. I watched as she wrapped the towel around herself, her eyes avoiding mine as she gathered her thoughts. I should probably go, I said, breaking the silence. She nodded, still not meeting my gaze. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I pulled on my clothes, the weight of reality starting to settle in as I did. Everything was about to get a lot more complicated. But even as I prepared to leave, I couldn't stop thinking about her, couldn't stop replaying the way she felt in my arms. As I reached the door, I turned back to her. Sarah, this doesn't have to be the end. She looked up at me then, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I saw that spark again, the same one that had drawn me to her in the first place. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, felt her. It was impossible to focus on anything else. Even when Jenny came back from her trip, I found myself distracted, my mind constantly drifting back to that afternoon in the tub. I felt guilty, but not enough to stop. The tension between Sarah and me didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. Every time we saw each other at family gatherings, there was this unspoken connection, this electric current that hummed between us. I would catch her looking at me, and for a split second everything else would disappear. We couldn't pretend that nothing had happened, no matter how hard we tried. One evening, a week after that day in the bathroom, I found myself alone with Sarah again. It was at a family dinner, the others were busy talking in the living room, and we ended up alone in the kitchen. The air between us was thick with tension, neither of us willing to address the elephant in the room, but both of us painfully aware of it. "You've been quiet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I could feel the pull again, the same magnetic energy that had drawn me to her in the first place. My hands were trembling as I set down the glass I was holding, and I could feel her eyes on me. "Are you avoiding me?" she asked, stepping closer. I turned to face her, and in that moment, everything came rushing back. The way she felt in my arms, the taste of her lips, the warmth of her body pressed against mine. It was impossible to resist. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, my voice hoarse. She closed the distance between us in one swift movement, her hand reaching out to brush against mine. "Neither can I." Before I knew what was happening, we were kissing again, this time with even more intensity than before. There was no holding back, no hesitation. We had crossed the line once, and now there was no reason not to do it again. The world faded away as I pulled her close, lost in the moment, lost in her.